Hello everyone. Welcome to Careerflite. Today we are going to conduct a session on medieval India part 2. This is the continuation of the earlier class uh, that we have conducted on medieval India part 1. So today we are going to see the actual uh, stage whereby medieval India can be considered to be started. Now, in the last class, we talked about the Indian art and culture. Now, I told you that in order to compare this medieval India, or in order to understand medieval India in a comprehensive manner, we need to know the Indian culture which originally took place in India. Now, today we are going to discuss about the various kingdoms that were present during this medieval period of time. Now, let us categorize this medieval India into three categories, whereby we would get a systematic idea of which kingdoms actually existed during this period of time. Now, when we see this medieval India into three parts, we see the early medievals, the early medieval, which is regarded to be the earliest time since when this medieval India is considered to be started. Now, during this period, we see some of the major dynasties which has actually uh, left its great impact on the Indian history. So, first of all, we can say that Pratihara kingdom, Pratihara kingdom. Next is Rashtrakuta kingdom. The next comes the Chalukyans, then the Pallava, the Palas, more are like the Cholas, etc. Now, these are the kingdoms which were regarded to be the most important kingdoms when this medieval India is considered to be have started. Now, among this Pratihara, Rashtrakuta, Chalukya, Pallava, Palas, Cholas, etc., and more and more kingdoms also existed at the same period of time. However, we should understand that when we see the Indian map, the this period, okay, which was dominated mainly by three kingdoms. Now, if we see a rough sketch of Indian kingdom, we see the Pratiharas who have dominated here, and we see the Rashtrakutas mostly in the southern part of India, and we see the Palas in the eastern part of India. Now, however, we see that there's a place called Kannauj in central India, which was a bone of contention, or we can say that many wars were fought keeping the base as Kannauj by all these three powers. Now, let us see which all are the powers that came in the second stage of medieval history. Now, that is that can be considered as later medieval. Later medieval times, we see the Delhi Sultanate, we see the Ahom kingdom, which was in Assam, then the Rajputs, which was in Rajasthan, and also the Vijayanagara Empire. The Vijaya Nagara Empire. This was basically situated in southern India. Now, when we see all these kingdoms, this actually came after this early medieval period, whereby we see a short period of rule by Delhi Sultanate, mostly in North India, the Ahom kingdom, which is based on the Brahmaputra Valley, then the Rajputanas, which were in Rajasthan. They were dominant in Rajasthan and played a very important role in determining the medieval history of India. Then comes the great empire of Vijayanagar, which was basically based in southern India. It also has a landmark role played in Indian history. Now, the third stage, when we talk about, we see the dominance of Mughals. We see the dominance of Mughals who have ruled a longer period of time as compared to the other kingdoms. Now, when we see the early modern era, the last stage of medieval history, we see the Mughal Empire, the Mughal Empire, the Maratha Empire, then also the Sikh Empire, etc. Now, as we have seen all these stages, now we were clear that medieval India was basically dominated by lots of kings and kingdoms who have ruled at one time or the other. However, there were many battles fought, many systems that evolved in the Indian society, which was more a contribution of these rulers who came from outside. Now, when we see the medieval history in details, we find that most of the rulers were actually who actually came to India by some invasions, and very few were based in India. Now, if we understand the chronology of this medieval India, we see a definite pattern by which one after another foreign rulers came and thereby invaded India and thereby established their rule for a longer period of time. Now, while this evolution of time, we have seen that India has got, new kind of culture, new kind of religion practices, and also various other forms of, say, paintings, architecture, art, which has evolved, which were not purely Indian in nature, but however, it has a great influence of the outside world. Now, as any ruler would come to India, he or he would actually follow his own way or his own systems in all these spheres, be it political, administrative, or art and culture. So that is how the Indian culture has evolved at this stage, when we see that an influence of foreign culture or influence of foreign system on our own culture, and thereby we see a mixture that goes on during this period of time. Now, when we see this medieval era, uh, if you see the starting, how it all started in India, we could say that the Rajputana, the Rajputs, okay, that were dominant in the northwestern part of India, they were very, very powerful rulers, basically based in the state of Rajasthan, which we can relate it right now. So, what happened was this Rajputanas were very much attached to their land, to their family, to their clan, and they were actually they were hungry of power. They were uh, continuously uh, trying to get more and more territory, more and more power into their grip. So we see a lot of regional kingdoms in Rajputana. So these small kingdoms were the result of the power hunger, or you know uh, each king of Rajputana were trying to get more and more power, and therefore we can see a lot of regional kingdoms erupting in this same Rajputana. Now, however, if we see the farther northwestern part of India, we see that this part was not very much secured, or this was not guarded by a very powerful king at that period of time. And that was the time when, a lot of foreign intruders or foreign invaders, they actually entered India. They actually entered India. So we see that the Turkish invasion, which happened in India. Now, but however, when these Turkish people they entered into Indian territory, we saw that Prithviraj Chauhan was one of the Rajputs who actually defeated this invasion. But however, in the future, what happened? The Turkish again they came up to India and thereby captured this part of India. So this is how this Turkish actually entered into the Indian territory. Now, when this Turkish actually entered, we see that Khori was the ruler. Now, Muhammad Khuri was the ruler and he was also powerful, and thereby he established his empire in India. But however, he did not have any descendant later on, and therefore we see that he actually gives all the power to a slave of his in his own kingdom, and thereby we see that slave dynasty comes into power in India. So the slave dynasty was actually ruled by Qutbuddin Aibak. Then it was succeeded by Iltutmish. And thereby we see many other rulers who come and thereby, make a huge impact on the Indian history in the name of slave dynasty. But however, the slave dynasty during the slave dynasty, many things were done in India which still bears relevance. For example, the Qutub Minar, the historical building of Qutub Minar, was actually started by Qutbuddin Aibak at this period of time. So, after the slave dynasty, what we see the Khiljis enters into the Indian territory. Now, this was actually done by Jalauddin Khilji, who was the Khilji ruler who took over the Indian Empire from the slave dynasty. But however, this Jalaluddin Khilji was taken over or was succeeded by Alauddin Khilji, who also, ruled for a very long period of time, and mostly his rule confined to the southern part of India. And so we can see that Khiljis has entered and thereby ruled in India. Then after the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs were the very powerful kingdom who came up into the Indian territory. Now, Tughlaq, when we see Tughlaq, there were various kings who did many remarkable things, like the Muhammad bin Tughlaq, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, etc. Then, after the Tughlaq rule in India, we see these many other small kingdoms which came up, like the Lodhis, the Sayyids, etc. During this Sayyid rule, one very important thing happened was, the capital of India was transferred from Delhi to Agra. However, we see that this Sayyid and Lodi dynasty, whenever it ended its rule, we see two powerful kingdoms emerging in the Indian territory. Now, those were the great Vijayanagara Empire and the Bahmanas Empire. Now, when we talk about Vijayanagara Empire, we know that it is basically based on the southern part of India. So, this Vijayanagara kingdom becomes very, very important after this period, who actually was very much dominant in the Indian politics in medieval India. Now, Uh, in this South Indian region, we see that Cholas were very, very important. Now, what was the impact of the Cholas that made it, very much important while we study medieval India? So let us see some of the few contributions that the Cholas actually did. Now, this Cholas during this Chola rule, what happened was that this Buddhism and Jainism, which even today is regarded to be the most important, very important religious sects, whereby the teachings are somewhat modern in nature, and it is more based on rationality rather than any rituals which were superstitious. So, see, during this Chola period, we see a widespread, s- widespread, spreading of this Buddhism as well as Jainism in India, and therefore, this Chola kingdom became very, very famous or very, very popular in India. Now, then after this brief period whereby we see the Turkish, the Rajputana, the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, the Vijayanagara Empire, the Cholas, etc., uh, after this stage we find a very important phase of Indian history. When it comes to medieval India, we see the emergence of Mughals. Okay, as the Mughals have ruled actually a very long period of time. So therefore, their impact on the Indian culture, Indian administration, Indian politics, Indian, you can say anything, the society has been very, very huge. So let us see what in Mughal Empire was important. Now, when we start the Mughal Empire, we see the starting it, the Babur. Okay, the king called Babur was the founder of Mughal Empire in India. Now, when we see the Mughal Empire Babur, we see a series of kings who comes after Babur. Like after Babur, many kings comes like Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and finally Aurangzeb also comes in the picture. Now, when we talk about this Mughal Empire in India, we see a lot of impact on the Indian society, which happened due to this Mughal rule. And when we see everything in details from our examination point of view, we see different spheres of the society, be it politics, administration, culture, art, painting, etc. Everything had a great influence of this Mughals on the over the Indian culture which existed prior to that. Now, if we see, suppose any sphere, say administration. In administration, new systems were introduced during Mughal period, whereby we find different designations which came for the first time in the Indian system in order to rule the state. Now, in case of military system also, we see many innovative things coming up from the Mughal Empire, which later on became, the system of the Indian military system, whereby we see, various examples of like, Dag, Chehra, this were all, you know, uh, system whereby, horses were being contributed to the novels. Now, in this period of time, what we see a very important feature that the art and culture was very much influenced by this Mughal people or the Mughal kingdoms, where we see that various. In case of architecture, we see even today we see various monuments, various architectures that were being made by this Mughal influence, whereby we see various features like a system of charbagh or the system of a water pool or a system whereby a dome-shaped monuments were being built up in India, which were hugely influenced by this Mughal period. Now, so art and culture is very, very important. If we see the evolution of art and culture in medieval history, we can see a clear impact of this Mughal rule in Indian culture. Now, the next point which we can see was the religion. Now, many rulers were there who had, different kind of belief, and thereby Akbar was also one of the ruler who, although he was a Muslim ruler, however, he also respected Hinduism. So, therefore, later on, he was very much rational by his outlook because he saw humanity as more important rather than any other religion. So, therefore, he came up with a new kind of religion and also new kind of rituals whereby people would follow that religion and which would emphasize more on humanity rather than on any communal lines that could come up. So, in religion also we see a huge shift. So, this is what about the Mughal rule is. Now, at last we see that the advent of Aurangzeb. Now, Aurangzeb was a ruler who was very determined, very strict, and by very and he was very pragmatic by his approach. So therefore, however, this pragmatism has actually led to the decline of the Mughal Empire to some extent, whereby he was more um emphasizing on power acquisition rather than art, architecture, etc. So therefore we see that all the kings who came up in this Mughal empire had different kind of attitudes, had different kind of nature. Now, however, this different nature, different attitude has actually contributed to the evolution of Indian history some way or the other, whereby we see different new innovative systems coming in to the Indian culture in all the spheres of life, whereby we we were exposed to the world in a more wider way. However, the systems which came due to this Mughal Empire in India were you know uh, basically focused on a more systematic administration which would happen in India. So, however, this had merits as well as demerits to the Indian society. So, when we see this Mughal Empire, we see that an evolution of Indian culture took place in a great way when this Mughal kings were concerned because they brought about new techniques, new ways, new systems into our own traditional system, which we have talked about in the earlier class, where we have seen our own culture. Now, if you see this Mughal period, we see a huge change when we compare to our own culture. So after this Mughal empire emerged, okay, we have seen that various changes has come up in the Indian society. But however, one very important and a positive thing that happened to the Indian society due to this all this evolution was the emergence of the Bhakti movement. Now, when we talk about Bhakti movement, what we generally focus on is the teachings and the preachings of some very important scholars or religious heads, okay, like Guru Nanak Dev Ji or Ramanujan or Namdev or Chaitanya, etc. We also see some Sufi saints who were also, a kind of social reformer who used to propagate, humanity or the real purpose of human life through their songs, etc. Hmm. So what we see, this social movement was also taking place by this kind of Bhakti movement or the Sufi saints, okay, whereby we see that a huge contribution was done to the Indian society, whereby the Bhakti movement, what it focused on was to decrease the inequalities of human being based on any kind of religion or any kind of practice, like the caste system, etc. So they believe that human beings are equal and therefore we should maintain an egalitarian society whereby we should actually go for rational thinking and leaving behind the old practices which would actually lead to some kind of ill culture in the society, because most of the rituals were based on superstitions. Now, this was the time when Bhakti saints actually worked for reforming the societal thinking, the people of the society who had actually been gripped in a dark age. Now, these saints were spontaneously trying to bring out the Indian society from such kind of superstitions and thereby, give them a new way of life whereby they could actually see the various rational prospects of the life of a human being. So, therefore, here we can say that, you know, uh, along with this thing, what we can see, suppose, for example, the Sikhism, the Sikh movement, okay, by Guru Nanak Dev Ji. If you see the teachings of Guru Nanak also, we find that, it is more based on rationality. It is more, based on humanity rather than any, superstitious rituals that people need to follow in the name of religion. So therefore, we see that religious, belief has got a shift from some kind of, irrational thing to a rational thing. So this the medieval period actually shows us how the Indian culture, or the Indian society in a broader way got shifted from one stage to other, whereby we see that uh, the shift in religious belief, the shift in religious practices, the shift in administrative practices, social practices, etc. So, therefore, we can say that all this time, whatever we see that various kings has been ruling in this medieval India, we see a huge impact of a foreign rule, as well as there were some internal rulers who also made contribution during this period of time, whereby we see a continuous evolution of human history, continuous evolution of Indian history, whereby we came in contact with more and more, developed world, and also we were exposed to the different systems which were not present in the Indian history before. So we can say that medieval India, when we talk about medieval India, it has a huge impact on the Indian history. Now, later on, what we see after this Aurangzeb's rule, the Mughal Empire actually comes to a decline, and that was the time when we see that British India comes into the picture, whereby the Britishers came to India for trade purposes, but however, their goal changed from commerce towards administrative and political capture later on. So, in the next class, we would see the impact of the British rule in India, and whereby we see the emergence of modern India, where we see different stages of, British history in India, or its impact on India, and also the freedom fighters, the contribution of the freedom fighters by which we finally attain our independence. So this is it. If you like the video, please share and subscribe it and spread it more so that more and more people can get help from this. Thank you so much.